All right, okay. So now we're going to speak about layoffs. And we're going to speak about layoffs and what we can do in order to be able to function in this environment. The how did I call it? Techpocalypse that is around us. For those who attended my previous talk, I apologize in front. There will be some overlapping, some stuff that you already saw, some shameless reuse of slides, but it's a different take on that. So first of all, well, it's really bad out there. And there is a service called Layoffs FYI that tracks the layoffs in the tech industry. And the numbers are not great. It got better in 2024, but not significantly, considering that we are now July. And we're already almost at half of the terrible 2023. If the trend continues, we will be almost as bad as 2023 by the end of the year. And for now, since 2022, since the economic turndown, more than 500,000 people lost their jobs in the tech industry, and that's a lot. First, I want to talk to you about whether those layoffs actually make sense. Are they the right thing to do? And it's interesting discussion, not just to understand whether they are just and then make us feel better, or unjust and then make us feel worse, or whatever, but also to understand a little bit deeper how our industry works and what companies should do in order to succeed. Yes, layoffs, no layoffs. And you might heard about or read these books called The Phoenix Project. Who read The Phoenix Project? Yeah, some of you. Whoever didn't, I really recommend it. This is a very profound book about DevOps, actually. It's a novel. So it's very light and engaging reading about a guy that basically invents DevOps during hard times in his company and manages to turn the company around and win thanks to DevOps. Now, the way he invents DevOps is by listening to one of the board members who is an advisor and his mentor. And this board member, his name is Eric, comes with very profound ideas that if you read this book that's called The Goal, you know exactly where Eric takes it. So The Goal is another novel about also business process that it's called The Theory of Constraints. And the author is Eliyahu Goldratt, very significant scholar in the area of productivity in business. And the theory of constraints of Eliyahu Goldratt has a lot of the basic concepts that DevOps built upon. Stuff like, for example, one of the most important tenets of DevOps is eliminating bottlenecks and optimizing only what matters, and all the other stuff. So basically, the Phoenix Project is the goal for IT. The goal is about manufacturing. The Phoenix Project is about IT, but the concepts are the same. Theory of constraints speaks about how important it is to maximize throughput. Sorry, it says theory of constraints teaches us how to maximize throughput, how to remove the bottlenecks, how to concentrate of what hurdles throughput and what's not. But in the basic in the base of that is the understanding of why throughput is important. Now, this is pre-goal view of the world. How the importance of what's really important for the industry was for the longest time cost, throughput, and inventory in the order of importance. And basically when companies wanted to do better, they concentrated the most on cutting cost. And then the next would be, okay, how do we produce more? And inventory was always kind of on the back of their minds. Now, what Eliyahu Gortra discovered and teaches us is that the most important thing in the company is throughput. Because throughput manages to optimize inventory. And the problem with inventory is that it is material that is not being converted to throughput. It represents a cost because we buy this material. And if we don't put it through throughput fast enough, it rots. It costs us more and more money. So if we want to be a successful enterprise in the industry, we need to maximize throughput in order to manage the inventory. And through that, we cut the cost down. And this might sound familiar if you are familiar with stuff like just-in-time production and lean manufacturing. What's it called? The Toyota principle. And all those industry, like manufacturing industry optimizations, if you look at them through this lens, you will see that all of them are about optimizing inventory to maximize throughput. Now, those two will cause cost reduction without concentrating on that. Now, this is the goal, and this is the lean manufacturing and just-in-time manufacturing and the Toyota principle. How it goes, how we can look at it in terms of IT company. Now, if you look at that and you translate it to what we are doing, the translation is the throughput is sales. This is where we push our software out of the door. And this is where the money comes in, which makes perfect sense. And inventory that sales pushes out of the door is actually code. This is the product, right? So for us, for IT companies, managing throughput is producing code that will be converted to our throughput, to our sales, in the best way possible. And that means that our code needs to be as good as possible so sales can sell it, push it through the door, maximizing incomes, and this is the most important part. Now, as cost fades to the background in the manufacturing industry, it also fades to the background in IT. So what I want to say is, if we want to impact performance, we have to concentrate on initiatives that increase throughput for us in production of better cost. And the opposite is correct. Cutting costs, which is layoffs, without increasing throughput by moving inventory, creating and selling more software, is absolutely useless. So when companies do massive layoffs without increasing throughput, without producing better software, they create a momentarily spike in their financial results because they reduced cost. But in the long run, they don't optimize inventory and do not improve throughput. Now, you might say, well, this is fine, but we overhired so much during COVID, and people don't really do anything in their job, they really should be fired. Right? There is this concept of silent quitting, when people who work remotely sit home all day, don't do much, or work on multiple jobs and create some minimal symptoms of doing something, but actually don't. And is it a good thing to get rid of this extra ballast, of this fat, because it's not contributing to throughput anyway? Well, yes and no. Yes, in terms of we really should only get rid of the people who are not doing their job. If that was the case, that was completely justified. Hey, we know how to measure performance of software engineers. We come to a definite conclusion that you don't work hard enough. This is where we depart. But this is not what happens. Instead, there are flat layoffs. Let's get rid of 10% of the workforce. Will this 10% include only those who don't work and retain everybody who do? Absolutely not, because we don't know how to measure productivity. And that's a whole different talk. Yeah, so my name is Baruch. I'm at Baruch at all the social media. Developer productivity advocate with the company called Gradle. Been in development and then went to DevOps, and this is where I discovered your Phoenix project and the goal and everything else. And now I'm talking about developer productivity engineering, which is also very, very related, as you just saw, to the goal, maximizing throughput and all this kind of stuff. DevOps tools for Java developers, that's my bridge from development to DevOps. The liquid software is about how we should release software better, and this has to do with maximizing throughput and everything else. Everything is connected. The most important slide of this talk is the show notes. You go to speaking.jbaruch, and you will find there, you won't because I didn't do it, but I will do it right now. This is what we call live improvement. So I need to make it public. Published, save. All right, let's see if that works. Yes, so on speaking.jbaruch you will find a page, landing page dedicated to this talk, and it includes the slides already there, all the links, the video that I'm recording right now, all the links that everything that I talk about all the books, the goal, the Phoenix project, my books, the research about silent quitting, and everything else is there. On the bottom of every page, speaking.jbaruch, hashtag DPE, developer productivity engineering, hashtag Uberconf. This is where we are at jbaruch for continue our conversation. So, yes, let's talk about layoffs. There are 4 types of human resources attrition. This is now very corporate speak. Very corporate speak. There is regrettable and non-regrettable, and voluntary and involuntary. What does it mean? Regrettable, voluntary. Well, I quit. Well, that's a bummer. We wanted to retain you. We're sorry. Voluntary, not regrettable. I quit. Well, you weren't good anyway. Non-regrettable and voluntary, you're just bad, so you're fired. And regrettable and voluntary, we are firing good people. Right, unfortunately, we have to lay you off, your position has been eliminated, and the leadership takes full responsibility. And this is what we're going to talk about. When we fire people that shouldn't be fired. And what it does, since the layoffs, how would you describe your personal feelings? This is a research into not who got fired. This is clearly, they are not in very good shape, obviously, but those who remain. Their teammates, their colleagues, everybody else in the organization. How do they feel after regrettable, involuntary attrition of their colleagues? This is the answer. In Wikipedia, there is an entry called survival guilt, which talks about some completely different levels of survivorship. But, interestingly enough, the symptoms are absolutely the same. Mental condition that occurs when a person believes they have done something wrong by surviving a traumatic or tragic event when others did not. So those are the survivors, and this is what they feel, and this is exactly what survival guilt is. Yeah, another book. David Noyer wrote a book about survivor guilt after involuntary attrition. The book is called Healing the Wounds. You know where to find the link at speaking.jbaruch. He calls it layoff survivor sickness because survivor guilt has a very different connotations and like war and genocides and what's not. He kind of dials it down a little bit and come up with its own term, layoff survivor sickness, which is exactly the same, right? In terms of symptoms, it's obviously milder because no one died, thankfully. Another research, very, very similar to the one that I presented you earlier, is from Biz Report. Now, you can see that 75% of layoff survivors say their work motivation has declined since the layoff. The survivors are less motivated to work. Going back to the previous, since the layoffs, my personal productivity has declined 74%. Here we said 71, very close. You know what's the difference between those two? 20 years. Biz Report is 2022. Leadership IQ, dot-com bust, 2000s. 20 years, completely different set of people, exactly same feelings. This is how you know it's real. Since the layoffs, from what I've seen, the productivity of my co-workers has declined, 64%. 65% of the survivors say they're overworked since the layoff. This is another aspect of that. People were hired to do something, to have their objectives and their goals and their tasks. Now, when they are fired, the survivors are expected to pick up the slack and do more. So people who are motivated less are expected to do more, and the companies that did those massive layoffs now claim that they are lean and mean. Less motivated, overworked. Definitely not lean and mean. But the show must go on, right? Obviously, the companies want to succeed. Eventually, the survivors want to succeed as well. Unless they quit and look for better companies, they're stuck there. Now, quitting is not really an option because, as you just saw, there is more than 500,000 people looking for jobs in this industry right now. So if you quit now, where are you going to go? Yes?
I would argue the best people always have the option of quitting, and that's usually the second wave that leaves after a while.
Yeah, exactly, right? I mean, yeah, whoever left. But we're talking about survivors. Those who didn't leave because maybe they don't consider themselves the best that they will be able to learn. So they're stuck there, and they want to do their job. And most importantly, the organization want to see results. Now, unfortunately, Not a lot of organizations realize the pyramid that we spoke about, that layoffs without increasing throughput are pointless, and expect the organization to do better just because of the layoffs. How do they do that? They try to put more pressure on the people that remained. Now, the problem is, it doesn't work. It doesn't work because this is not how people in professions like IT are motivated. How are they motivated? Yay, another book. Drive by Daniel Pink. This is one of the most important books about human motivation written in the last, I don't know, century. And I definitely recommend all of you read it. To summarize it, there is a tech talk done by Daniel Pink, and I will summarize it here in one slide. 3 factors to lead to better performance and personal satisfaction are autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Not money, not punishment. Carrot and stick works in a very limited scenarios of very low skill work. When you can reward someone for doing very limited work, you can reward them more to do more work, but usually with intellectual types of jobs, carrot and stick stop working very, very early. Even money, what's supposed to be the ultimate motivator, stops working in a surprisingly early stage. Yes, obviously, money motivates great people who don't have enough money. But when the money question for the person is off the table in terms of their needs, basic needs, and more, what they consider their basic needs, are fulfilled, increase of money generate more motivation for a very short time. And I think, I don't want to speak for all of you, but a lot of you probably in some point of their career can attest to that. Yes, the yearly increase comes, sits very nice. It feels great. It's important. It makes us happy for a month, 2 months. If we don't struggle, if we don't live month to month, then this extra money stopped motivating us a couple of months down the road. Obviously, if they will take it away, that will be a disaster. But we don't think about this last increase very, very sooner than you might expect. And this is where those 3 factors come in: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. By autonomy, Daniel means no micromanagement. By mastery, Daniel means the pleasure that we have of doing something meaningful, doing it well, and probably that other people won't be able to do it that easily, right? One of the nice markers that you enjoy this mastery is sayings like, if it would be easy, everybody would do it. You tell it to yourself to highlight your mastery, that you are doing something that is more complicated than most of the people can do, and this is why you are rewarded and you feel motivated. And purpose is this feeling of belonging to something greater. And the best example here would be those projects that are not going anywhere. If you ever worked on one of those, you know how demotivating it is when you write code for a project that eventually gets cancelled. If we consider just money motivation, that really shouldn't matter. You write code, why you get paid for it, why do you even care if it went to production or not? But being a part of the purpose means a lot. It's the same with, hey, I won't work for Facebook ever. Why? What do you care? They pay well, you write interesting code, they do some absolutely awesome research. We're going to speak about some of it today. This is like really great place to work. But hey, no, I don't want to work for Facebook because they're evil or whatever, you name yours. This goes into purpose. And this is important stuff, apparently, for a lot of people. Now, since we are talking about developer productivity engineering, let me give you some examples from developer productivity engineering point of view and how developer productivity engineering aligns with those three. For example, something that we spoke in the previous talk, don't ruin the flow. Right? The build takes forever, I'm distracted to do other things, and the context switch is terrible, and we have a lot of study now that actually proves it. What does it do to us? It demotivates us. And this is like a real deal. Survey of developer companies, the biggest pain is too much time spent waiting on build and test feedback, either locally or doing CI. 84%. And we can do now show of hands. Who is happy with their build speed? No one. That's exactly that. Flaky tests. This hurts a lot because it might be irrelevant for what I'm doing. It's the last in the testing suite, so the tests run the longest time, and then they fail for some obscure reason. Again, 65%, inability to easily troubleshoot and determine the root cause of build, test, and CI failures. And the feeling that everything is somehow getting slower in my environment, in my build, in my CI. My build used to be fast, but now it's not. I didn't do anything. Why? You know what? We feel it every day with our smartphones, with our computers, right? Something that used to, my smartphone is 2 years old, but I remember it to be much faster 2 years ago. What happened? Same with our build. What happened? Right? Inefficient observability of analytics on build and test performance, and regressions, failure trends, and productivity bottlenecks 20%. Right? Yes?
Got another one. A way to increase productivity is to increase the number of meetings.
Meetings are very, very important aspect of productivity in general, and it is very conflicting. Because obviously bad meetings are bad, and they are much worse than just wasting our time. It's the context switch. Those meetings are eating into our productive time when we can engage in doing productive work. And if they interrupt our flow, this is very, very costly, again, as we spoke previously in my previous talk. On the other side, there is no alternative of productive collaboration than speaking to each other. Yes. So, yes, this meeting should have been an email, but also, yes, those 100 emails should have been 15 minutes meeting. Right? So, but either the way how you look at those meetings and how they eat to your productivity or help your productivity is not directly related to engineering. And what we are talking about here is the engineering aspects of developer productivity. This is why it's called developer productivity engineering. Right? So meetings are very related to productivity, less related to engineering. And developer productivity in general have a lot to do with autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And hence, a lot to do with motivation. So autonomy is not only lack of micromanagement, but also tools are not in my way. If I need a team of my corporate infrastructure to spin up my testing environment so I can test my code, this directly hurts my autonomy and directly hurts my motivation. Mastery, tools and processes help me to excel if I can build better code because my environment supports it. For example, it gives me faster feedback and I can improve without waiting hours for results. This goes directly into mastery. And purpose, obviously the entire thing of why I want to be productive is to work on the product and improve my productivity in general, right? So, and a lot can be done and said in improving developer productivity. Meetings, more sleep, exercise, and what's not. But obviously, there is also the engineering aspect of developer productivity engineering. What is developer productivity engineering? One of the most important parts of it is foster faster feedback. And we spoke about how build is in our way, how it ruins our flow, how the context switches are terrible. This is eliminating that. Eliminating toil for developers, that's another important part of it. And this is how we can just be more productive instead of opening and moving around those Jira tickets, right? This is toil that needs to be automated. Collaborate through effective tooling. And this is about people not being in my way. If I can ask for help from right person instead of going through chain of command and shuffling tools around, this is obviously helps. Automation and bottlenecks. This is prioritizing automation and eliminating bottlenecks. This goes directly in how productive we are and if we have bottlenecks in our journey to productivity. Rigorous observability. This goes into how everything is somehow slow. Why it is slow? There is a reason why the build that used to take 2 minutes now takes 5 minutes. What is the reason? How do we know and how do we can find it? And organizational mindset. Everybody are thinking about production environments, but what about development environments? Who thinks about those? Probably no one. That should change. And outcomes over output. There is tons of noise in our work. There is tons of noise in our environments. How do we manage to only focus on outcomes? So let me show you some examples of how this is done. The key here is small, constant improvements. And I will show you some techniques that you can do today in order to make your life as a developer better, increase your motivation, and maybe somehow overcome this layoff survivor syndrome that we spoke about. So first of all, better IDE. This is such an obvious decision to make. And I know that some companies will force you into the IDE that doesn't make you productive. This has to change. There is absolutely no reason for you not to use the IDE that you are most effective with. And you might say, okay, you know what? They might allow it, but they're definitely not going to pay for it. And I can give you solutions to that. So, for example, JetBrains, the company that does probably the best IDEs in the world, gives away tons of free licenses under different programs. For example, local meetups. I run a Java user group in Nashville, and we raffle 2 licenses for any JetBrains IDE every month. And more so, if someone will come to me and say, hey, my company won't pay for my IntelliJ idea, but I really think that's the idea that I'm most productive with, we'll find a way to give them a license. So if that's your problem, there are solutions. And the easiest way will be go to your local JUG ask them about the free licenses for JAG, and if they don't do it now, it will be a good time for them to start, and they will give you one license for just bringing that to their attention, and if not, it's pretty easy to find a way. Worst case, you can always write to their community organizers and JetBrains and just ask, hey, I love your IDE, there is no way for me to pay for it, can you sponsor one? And I think, I obviously cannot guarantee, but I think there are good chances that they will just give you a license. So yeah, there is no reason not to use a better IDE. Testing, absolutely critical, right? We're going to speak in a couple of minutes about the feedback cycle and how the sooner you get feedback about the quality of the code that you write, the better off you are. And testing is obviously the way we do it. This is why we write tests. We want to see if the changes that we do are right or wrong. Now, traditionally, there are two ways of testing. You have your unit test, and then you have your integration tests. And your unit test is when you check something, piece of code in isolation, and you only check the logic, and then you mimic the interface that should connect with that to give you the right result, because you only check something very isolated. And there is the other one, which is integration. It checks your system with all the parts that integrates with that, and it obviously gives you better picture because you want to mimic something that runs in reality, and in reality your code do run together with other parts. But the reason why you do the unit test and not only do the entire thing is because doing the entire thing is usually very expensive. In terms of money, those environments cost money. In terms of performance, they are slow to start up. In terms of management, you need to make sure that you treat the test data correctly. You start in a certain state and you finish in a certain state, and what's not. Now, there is one brilliant project that if you don't use, you need to start using today, called test containers. Test containers take advantage of the virtualization that Docker containers provide us in order to do this win-win. Have the simplicity of unit tests in terms of how fast and how cheap they are to write and operate, but also give you real integration with real tools that run in production for your local tests. It will spin up your databases, your buses, your your Kafka and stuff. Everything that in the end of the day runs in production can be emulated very, very closely to production using test containers. So you get the cheap and easy spin of tests as it was unit tests, but you get the complete picture as it was integration tests. If you are not using test containers, you really, really should. Better code. It's not directly related to verifying the quality of your code, but in the end of the day, if your code is failing some pull request because you didn't comply to some corporate standards of how to test your code, this actually is going to hurt your productivity. The way to prevent it is check if your code is good in terms of linting very, very early, and tools like Sonar can definitely help you with that. Flaky test detection. There are ways to detect flaky tests. And if you do that, your testing becomes more reliable, obviously. So this is also a very, very important aspect. And foster faster feedback. Now, what is feedback? Feedback comes in multiple layers. Your IDE has sub-second feedback. You write something, it marks it red, this is incorrect, and you fix it. You get this feedback immediately. Your build should be very, very fast as well. It should run in seconds. It usually don't, but it really should. CI, this is where we get into longer processes. So your CI will take minutes, sometimes it will take hours, and then the feedback for production that you're still gonna get, it will take much longer, hours, days, like maybe a month or whatever. You eventually will get this feedback from production, it's just not very fast one. So basically we can see how it is a reverse dependency on distance from developers, and shifting left, we expect faster feedback. Now in reality, build is something that stands out as not matching this trajectory. The build should take seconds, but it frequently takes almost as long as your CI. If XKCD made a comics about it, probably it's correct, right? And you obviously know this one. The #1 programming excuse for legitimate disliking of, my build is running, basically. This is what it is here. My build is running. Now, I'm very skeptical about those two having fun. They might have fun for a first time, maybe for a second time, but trust me, you don't need to trust me, you know exactly as good as I am that after a week of long builds, they won't have fun anymore. Instead, they're going to bang their heads on the tables, annoyed with their build is slow, right? It's going to be like that. Now, the problem with that is that to try and fix it, you really need to understand what's going on. And build is a complicated domain, which is related, but not as same as general software engineering. When you write your production code, it doesn't make you an expert in build tools. But to understand why the build is slow, you actually need to be an expert in build slow. So Bruce Eckel, one of the biggest names in our industry, the writer of Thinking in Java, that a lot of us learn Java by his book and generally like a luminary, he wrote a blog post about how Gradle is terrible. And the highlight of this blog post is that to do anything, you have to know everything. This is obviously an exaggeration, but he has a point in terms of in order to build your perfect build, or for that matter, to make it faster than your naive implementation, or for that matter, to troubleshoot why the build is slow, you actually need to understand how build works. And this is not your domain. So not only it is slow, it's also the developers have no idea why. And obviously the statement about you need to understand build in order to make efficient build is not only about Gradle. It's the same with Maven that has tons of very weird behavior that you need to really understand how Maven works in order to be able to understand why it does what it does. And it's obviously true for Bazel, which does tons of black magic in order to make build more effective. And I would say very few of you understand it, and it's fine because it's not your job. But now the build is slow and you have no idea why. Let's try and understand. So what is build? There is a phase of project setup when we run the build. What happens during the build? There is a project setup, and then we download our dependencies, and then we generate artifacts. Compilation, packaging, depends on your language, and then we run tests, because this is the feedback that we want to get, and then we deploy in Maven terminology, we deploy the artifacts. And deploying the artifacts on local build will probably be caching it for reusing if they didn't change. And if we are talking a build that runs in the CI, it will go into our deployment pipelines and eventually end up in the product. But we do something with the artifact, right, basically. Now, the thing is that everything on this list can go wrong. Every point can screw up. And obviously at absolutely any time, which can be completely random. And knowing Bruce Eckel and knowing the industry, we can safely say that yes, the build frustrates the developers regardless of which build use are we using. Build frustrates the developers when it's slow or when it breaks. Now, I asked ChatGPT, what techniques can be used to speed up a Maven build, for example? The first example is, the first quick tip is skip tests. This is a terrible idea. The entire purpose of our build is to get feedback on the code that we wrote. If we are skipping tests, we don't get this feedback. You know what? Let's take it further. How about skipping compilation? That sounds, it will speed up our build. We can just take the source code, take it to production servers, and compile it there. And if it runs well, that's nice. Skipping tests is exactly the same level of ridiculous idea. We want faster feedback, not less feedback. What feedback do we want? In order to understand what can be included in the good feedback, we can look at the place where the most of the feedback is collected. And that will be our CI/CD pipeline quality gates. What do we check before we go to production will give us a good idea what do we want to check in general. So basic stuff like it compiles, and the unit tests are passed, integration test passed, this kind of stuff. Quality, how can we check quality? Stuff like code coverage, linting, and static code analysis. Security, dependency scanning, secret scanning, what's it called? Static code analysis for security, and this kind of stuff. And then non-functional tests like load testing, resource utilization, and compliance. Now, if we can get all those checked before we go to production, this is great. Now, the problem with checking it before we go to production is that this goes into the long part of the feedback. So it is very important that it's there, but it is not great for our purpose because CI/CD is asynchronous feedback. It's right here. We never wait for our CI/CD. We commit our code, and then if anything of this pipeline failed, we will know about it much later. It's good that we know about it because it's before it went to production. But it's very, very distracting because we're already working on something else. Now, the build on the other side is synchronous. If the build is fast enough, we can wait for it. And if something went wrong during build, we will easily fix it without context switching, which is great. But it will be very painful if it's slow. And as I mentioned, the commit time is the difference between synchronous and asynchronous builds. So what if we could do all that, which is our ideal feedback, but in build time? This sounds like a great idea, but it sounds like it will slow the build dramatically. So what we want to do is both. We want to provide maximum feedback, and we want to do it as fast as possible so it won't distract us from what we already switched to doing. So let's talk about how can we do that. First of all, we should skip everything that we can skip, but no more. What's the problem in skipping tests? We are missing the feedback on the code that we changed. Skipping tests of the code that we didn't change is completely fine. Because we didn't touch it, we don't need to test it again. So we need to skip what can be skipped, but no more. And this group of optimizations called avoidance techniques. And the first avoidance technique is incremental build. So basically in incremental build we say, don't build what didn't change, don't build what wasn't affected, and don't generally only build what has been changed. And the shortcomings of incremental build, which all the modern build tools know how to do, both Gradle and Maven and Bazel and SBT and others, is that it relies on produced artifacts. How does Maven or Gradle know to skip building a certain module? Because the artifacts of this module are in your build outcome directory. Oh, it's already been built, so we don't need to build it again. Now, what defeats incremental build? Stuff like Maven clear build or Gradle clear build. Right? This is why you might hear some of the Maven advocates like Andres Almarai, for example, making his goal in life to make sure that no one runs MVN clean build. This is he's the most obsessed about, because this is really kills the avoidance smartness of build. I will show you how you can run Maven clean and still be fine. Right. Relies on architectural decisions. How does build know what wasn't affected? Well, it tried to guess based on how our modules are interacting. If there is a dependency between two modules and one depends on the other, when we change the API, we need to rebuild both the API and the implementation. But when we change only implementation, we don't need to rebuild the API. Build tools know it by observing those dependencies. But what if our architectural decisions are not good enough? What if we have a monolith that is not broken down well enough? What if in some point of time someone adds dependency between implementation and API? That means that we need to rebuild everything all of the time. What works better than incremental build is caching. Caching makes the build faster, obviously, because it caches the produced artifacts. It caches the produced outcomes of every task, not in the form of artifacts, but as a separate outcomes cache. If we use a remote cache, we can even reuse what we built or what our teammates build for our build as well. Given a certain inputs, our teammate produced certain outcomes. Those outcomes are now cached in a central location. If I have the same inputs, my build won't run the build. Instead, it will take those caches and use them as the result, saving us time. It makes the build faster always, because it doesn't rely on artifacts, but instead of cached outputs, and it doesn't rely on architectural decisions. It will check if the inputs and the outputs didn't change, and then it will skip the build entirely, regardless of dependencies between the modules. And it makes all parts of the build faster. Avoidant techniques that, incremental build that relies on artifacts relates only to the tasks that produce artifacts, compilation. But caching actually can work on any task that you can define inputs and outputs. It can be anything. It could be test versus test result. It could be code generation versus generated code. It can be properties files creation with the existence of properties files. everything that you can define, input and outputs, can be cached. And the results are much more effective than only incremental build. So here is a build of an Apache project. Gradle sponsors Apache Foundation with the Velocity, which, among other things, provides build caching and also gives you the visibility of how it works. And this is one of the Apache projects called Boom, Beam, Boom, something like that. So build 12 minutes, 12 and a half minutes. Avoidance savings, 40 minutes. This build should have taken 42 minutes. Instead, it only took 12. Now, why? Here is the answer. Where is it? Yeah. So we saved 40 minutes. 20 of them was the incremental build. So half of it was incremental build. 4 seconds was local cache on the machine that it ran. And then we saved 20 minutes by using the remote cache. This is a huge saving. OK, what else can we avoid? How about not running tests that we don't need to run? Yes? No, that's a good idea. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, me too. So how can we avoid running tests that we don't need to run? So obviously, incremental build does some of that. If we are not going to build a module, we're not going to run their tests. But we actually can do better. We can use machine learning to understand what code changes affect what tests. Just by observing code changes and build results, we can build a correlation between the two. And once we've done that, we can skip tests for code changes that we predict won't break the tests. Code changes and test results are thrown into a learning model. There is like a learning phase in which we run all the tests all the time. And the model observes, hey, we changed this. Those tests didn't fail. Those tests didn't fail. Those did. And it does it for a lot of tests for a while. After a while, the model predicts which changes fail which tests. Now, I'll give you a couple of examples which are very interesting because, well, in a second. First of all, what changed, where it changed, correlate with what failed, predictions, which changes will fail, which changes. And I will give you a couple of examples, which is very interesting because it shows you how machine learning can come to very human conclusions. The more tests a project has, the less they break. For us, this is like the obvious thing, right? Because if we have a good test coverage, our changes will break less tests. Now, obviously, the model has no idea what it means. It doesn't know about clean code. It doesn't know about refactorings. It doesn't know about any of that. The whole thing is there is an observance and correlation. And the second one is even funnier. Refactorings in Java break tests less than in JavaScript. For us, this is obvious because one is statically typed, the other is dynamically typed. Refactorings in Java with support of IDE are almost always safe because the IDE will find all the usages and will change everything accordingly. In JavaScript, which is dynamically typed, a lot of things that we change are not being able to trace to other places. So for us, it's obvious that refactorings in static language are much safer than refactorings in dynamic language. But this is a model that has no idea what I just said. All it knows that there is a project, and all the files there have the extension .java. And here's another project that all the files there has the extension .js. Here, it's more stable. Here, it's less stable. This is all the model knows. The conclusion is very human. Hey, static languages are better than dynamic languages when it comes to reliability of refactorings. Now, this is a Spring Framework instance of DPE, of the Velocity. We sponsor a Spring project with that as well. Now, they run predictive text selection model in learning mode for years. They never turned it on. We probably should have told them to turn it on. I would do it because this is a great material to show you how the model works. Obviously, after it's turned on, we don't know how well the model performs because we just observe what it decides to skip or not to skip. But in learning mode, we can actually compare the prediction to the real deal, because the model predicts that a certain test will or won't fail, and then the Spring Framework will run the test anyway because they run everything they didn't turn it on, and then we can compare. So let's see how well it is. 98.7% out of goal failures predicted correctly, task goal failures, and 96.5% of test failures predicted correctly. This is insane accuracy. We can see here that 270,000 tests run, 37 predicted incorrectly. This is absolutely nuts. Now, what it would save them is, I'm looking at the last 90 days, 61 days. Now you might say, okay, but what about those 37 tests? This is like, they wouldn't be run. The whole idea of this is, hey, we can skip 61 days of testing, and most of the time, whatever we say that you can skip, you can actually skip. But hey, you were wrong 37 times. 37 times, we would skip a test, and that would be a bug. It would fail if we run it. But this is local environments. You know where we should run all the tests? In our CI. And we don't care because it's async feedback. It can take as long as it wants. But will it interrupt our work when 37 tests are discovered? Yes. How frequent it will be? Not at all. Very rare. The trade-off between having much longer local build and very rare occasions of full predictions is definitely worth taking. You wanted to ask something? You wanted to ask something? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering, like, for training this, like a prediction model.
Yeah. Oh, it really depends on how many tests you have. And the model will tell you when they have a right degree of confidence to switch it on. It might be everything between weeks and months, basically. Okay. Now, we avoided building what is not, we cached everything, so we avoid building, we avoid testing. There is some stuff that cannot be avoided. In the end of the day, we write code and we do stuff and we want to, and we still want our build to be short. For that, we can speed up things. Test parallelization is much more powerful than you would expect. Our modern hardware is extremely powerful, and our local builds can be very, very fast. And yes, your boss should buy you the bleeding edge, especially after they fired all your colleagues, and now you need to work on their behalf as well. There is a lot of hardware that are going to sell off, and for all this money, they need to buy you one good machine. Because this. So this is a test sample that I run right here on this one. This is not very new. This is M1 from 2 years ago. Not the most bleeding edge of software, of hardware. And this runs 2 minutes, this project. Now I change one line in my build, and it goes to 11 seconds. From 2 minutes to 11 seconds by doing this. Just use all available processors. That's all. Nothing else. From 2 minutes to 11 seconds. You know what has more computer power than this machine? The cloud. If we can take those tests and put them out there to the cloud and say, run it on the cloud, it gives us even more parallelization. CI, all the modern CI, use this technique. It's called fan-out. And it's used to do exactly that, to spin up tests. But fan-out is necessarily used during CI and not during local tests. But we want to use them to local tests. So our local build, we want to use the cloud to distribute the load. We want to take those tests, send them to the cloud, let them run, and give me back the result to my local machine, to my local Gradle or Maven or Bazel build. And then run all the necessary tests, but not more, but not less. We don't need to skip tests if the cloud runs it really, really fast. So why wouldn't we just use CI fan-out? Well, because first of all, it relied on a shared CI infrastructure, which is generally not, and this is a very interesting story, but it is not optimized to run the build as fast as possible. Because it is not optimized for real-time feedback. Because we don't hear how long the CI takes up to a certain point. But there is definitely not an optimization for real-time feedback. Are the agents that CI fan-out use as fast as they can be? Probably not. Because the incentives of people who set it up are completely different. All they want to make sure is that why they do CI fan-out, not for performance, but for checking different environments. This is a Windows agent, and this is a Mac agent, and this is a Linux agent. We want to make sure that our tests pass on all the operating systems. This is a completely different incentive than getting fast as possible real-time feedback. For distributed testing, we need to make sure that the agents are as fast as possible, not as diverse as possible. And the last part of our journey to improving developer productivity is observability. So observe and improve, as we do with production, is absolutely the same in local environments. And the first one is measuring local build times. And this is surprisingly, I don't want to put anyone on the spot here, but this is surprisingly something that is not happening enough. Most of the people, and especially team leads and engineering managers, have no idea how fast or slow the local builds of their team members are. And this is scary, because this is right there the productivity and hence the motivation of their employees. And then if we start measuring it, we can speak about, hey, it did get slow, why it did get slow, find the root causes, and improve. And again, if you use tools like the velocity, you can see it right there. This is a trend of a build time. This is boiling the frog. This is creeping up. Not significantly that anyone can actually see it right away, but bad enough so it will kill the productivity and the motivation eventually. And if we ask people, did it help? We can definitely say that yes. Developer productivity engineering dramatically improves productivity. Say 84% of organizations that implemented it, and we asked them how it went. And my favorite slide of this talk is this. Developer productivity fosters developer joy. I love this slide because of joy, because how profound it is, especially considering where we started with the survivor syndrome, right? This is exactly the opposite. Same, I guess, 84% also say that not only it improved their productivity, it also makes their job more enjoyable. And this is exactly what we try to do now, the survivors of the layoffs, right? Now, what it has to do with all of you, DPE is not really your job. And this excuse, DPE is not my job, sounds very, very familiar. This sounds exactly like DevOps is not my job, right? And if you work in a company that try to implement DevOps, this struggle might be something familiar when the ops people come to the dev people and say, hey, we need you to take ownership of your product now and see it all the way to production. Well, but it's not my job. Well, 15 years into DevOps, this is not a discussion anymore. This is solved. Developers understand why they need DevOps and how making sure that your product is in production is your job. How about DPE? DPE is a little bit different. So the outcome of DevOps done right is the product being in production in the best way possible. The DPE on the other side is about being more productive. It means that it's not on the mind of all the people all the time. The product is the most important stuff. Is it up? Are everybody happy? Is it performing well enough? DPE, well, how many of you track your build times? Not enough. So this slips away even for people who should be the most invested in it, and this is us. And this is why, while for DevOps, organizational culture kind of embrace DevOps, for DPE, we see that having a specialized team that concentrates on DPE actually brings more results. And the best DPE organizations out there have those DPE teams in place. You can see Snowflake is hiring for their developer productivity engineering, and LinkedIn is hiring for a productivity and IT team, includes developer productivity and enterprise productivity. And Microsoft is hiring for senior software engineer platforms and engineering productivity. And Spotify brags about how we improve developer productivity for our DevOps teams. And Netflix hiring senior software stack engineer developer productivity. And who else we have here? Elastic, looking for a team lead in engineering productivity. So you see, although the layoffs, and in the middle of all that, the great DPE organizations actually see how it is important. And what's kind of the common denominator of a lot of those? Your LinkedIn's, your Netflix's, your Spotify's. This is what we call post-cloud, pre-Kubernetes. This is a very interesting point of time in which all those organizations kind of popped when they already knew that there is a cloud to be utilized, but the cloud wasn't commoditized by Kubernetes yet. And this is where the awareness of how do we make developers more productive to utilize this golden age of cloud before we can take a monkey and make them pass DevOps Kubernetes certification and they will be able to spin up containers. This is the sweet spot of engineering excellence. And this is why all those companies have this culture and invent in developer productivity engineering. Right? So fighting the downsizing survivor guilt with DPE. It improves morale, it covers productivity gaps, it is the right thing to do for both the employees to foster their joy and for the business to be more productive, but it requires an organizational mindset and dedicated effort. With that, you can learn more and try it today. The speed challenge, which actually makes you improve your build or an example build and see what you can do with all those techniques that we spoke about. Agent of change, you know what? Maybe your organization actually needs a DPE organization and you will be the spearhead of that. DPE handbook, DPE Summit videos, that's a conference that we hold about developer productivity engineering in San Francisco in September. The next one is coming up very soon in September. Talk to me if you want a discount. With that, thank you very much. Jay Baruch on social media. Wrong tab, this is not Those Days Tel Aviv, this is Uberconf. And then speaking.jbaruch for the slides, the video, and all the links for everything that we spoke about. Thank you. All right, we have 15 minutes for questions, or we can be first in the line for lunch.
How do you track, like, what is one approach to tracking local build times? Like, what tools?
So, all right, so there are some things that you can do which are like straight off the ball and very easy. The first is build scans. Gradle provides a free service. It's called Gradle Build Scan, and you have it in the show notes. You just run your build if it's Gradle with Dodger Scan. If it's Maven, it's a little bit longer, and then you will get all the breakdown of what took, how long, and why. This is just built in, and it's free, and you just use it. If you want to build it yourself, just do the simplest thing. Make a recorder that will take the total time of your build and drop it into your Prometheus. You'll see if it goes up, goes down, what's going on with it. You have trends over like a month, and you will be able to say, you know what, I need to look deeper. And then, okay, then you need something like build scans to understand what took longer, why. Maybe some tests now run longer. Maybe dependency download suddenly is slower than it used to be. Maybe there is an opportunity to turn on the cache, this kind of stuff. But first of all, do something. In order to understand that you have a problem, the first step is just like, you know what, write it on a piece of paper every day. Do something. There is like, from just noting the time to look at the build scan and the trends and everything in between. All right, let's go and be first in the line for lunch. Works for me.